We are live. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for tuning into our first session of Growing Pains, a series of quick firesides with leaders all around Asia, sharing their stories, learnings, and insights on developing better people managers at hyper-growth companies. The goal of these sessions is to give you bite-sized perspectives and real-life insights so you can make an impact tomorrow with your organization. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Susan Chen, Head of People at Riot Games Development in Hong Kong and Singapore, also a longtime friend. She was the ex-global head of talent at Gojek and has over a decade of experience developing leadership and talent strategies across the globe. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you for having me.
Susan, we are here today to really learn about what a growth mindset is and how you have used that to develop some of the best leaders in the region. Let's start with, what is growth mindset from your perspective?
So, I think about growth mindset as a way of thinking and a way of being, as a way you approach problems, as a way that you think about building habits. How do you lead a team? And it's really a belief that you can learn more, you can do better as you continue to think about opportunities to learn. So it's all about how do you continue to learn rather than thinking there's a best way to approach or there's the best answer to a problem.
Why is it suddenly so relevant in today's business environment? Is it just a meta term? Is it just the taste of the month? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, good point. People used to say, oh, growth mindset feels so fluffy, right? It's just something really cool to talk about when you say, hey, I'm a big believer in growth mindset. But I do think it's becoming more and more relevant, if not really relevant, in particular the pandemic environment that we're moving into. I think as the world becoming even more uncertain, as we are thinking about truly transform the way we are doing things or thinking, thinking about Gojek's journey, Uber, transforming the way we think about transportation, food, Riot Games, transferring the way that we think about entertainment and play experiences. I think the world is just becoming so different and is constantly changing. Growth mindset becomes really that approach, I think, again, to the way we solve problems.
So you look at that piece around the people solving problems, Susan. How does that actually take effect in a company? Is there someone that is gifted with growth mindset, or is there something that you can develop? What's your approach to that?
So I do think they are people who has more growth mindset tendencies, but I also believe that we all have both. So for example, I'm awful in accounting. So I tend to think about numbers in a much more fixed mindset approach compared to some of the things I'm really good at. So I think growth mindset to a certain extent is not to say it's one or the other. It's about we have a spectrum. How do we approach certain things could be a bit more fixed mindset, and how we approach certain things will be more growth mindset. I think that's an important thing to walk away, to not think it's one or the other. It's not sort of the flip side of the coin. It is such a fluid way to think about, again, problem solving that I do believe can be cultivated, right? I do believe that as a leader, we're able to cultivate that within our team, building a culture of that growth mindset, and also practicing that, building that habit for yourself as well.
Susan, you mentioned the accounting piece, and sorry, Mum, I also flunked accounting as well. But when you have a think about nurturing someone's growth mindset in something that he or she is not as strong in versus doubling down on someone's speciality, how do you build out that differentiation? Is it signals that you eventually look at?
So again, I think as a leader, one of our roles is be able to recognize where our team's strengths are. But I do think one of the important thing about growth mindset is how do we cultivate a team that allows for roadblocks, things that they are not so good at, to not be a roadblock to solving their problem, right? For example, if having a fixed mindset for me in accounting, let's say for argument's sake, that I don't want to do number modeling, but as a growth mindset person means that I need to continue to look for the people that can complement those skills, to build the network of understanding, to approach it so we're solving problems as a team. The beauty of, I think, in organizational context is that we are solving big problems together. So I think the importance of growth mindset is, how do we, one, be willing to step up and say, you know what, this is not where my strength lies. This is where I need help. This is where I want to learn more, and where I'm going to involve the others where this is their strength. And this is how I will complement my strength as well. Again, when I talk about it, is a mindset thing, because it is quite vulnerable, right? Sitting here now, I have it on recording that I'm not great in accounting, but that's okay. It's how do I make sure it doesn't become a roadblock to the work that I'm doing or the problem that I'm trying to solve as a team.
Susan, you mentioned, at these hypergrowth companies, they are solving big problems. How do you see the cultivation and, supporting that roadblock removal, so to speak? Because, as we're going into such a chaotic business environment, people are obviously always running through walls. How do you think about grooming and developing the next generation of, people leaders and business leaders at these, fast growing companies?
I think the beauty was with hyper growth organizations that we tend to see that we're not finding people who have solved the problem before, because you can't, right? These are new problems. So the beauty is, how do we start approaching recruitment in the way that we think much broadly about how people approach, again, the problems, how their tendencies are with regard to growth mindset, and bring them in, right? So I always believe in the hyper growth environment, the pitfall is when you try to hire people for skills, to say they have done this before, they're really good at this, rather than hiring for the mindset they bring, hiring for the approach, the way they're thinking about problem solving. So I think that's one way, is as organization to always be mindful of, are we hiring people for the right mindset or the supposedly skill? Or in a hyper growth, we have a tendency to go for brands that we know very well, right? In the high tech environment, we're like, oh, but Facebook have done it before, Amazon have done it before, to whatever extent that means. So that's hire people who has done that. And this is important, because I think growth mindset can only be meaningful and productive if it's applied within the context, right? So how do we bring the people, again, that takes into understanding the context before they apply the growth mindset to solve the big problem we're trying to solve? And to crystallize this, what does that look like? It looks like when you're in an organization, sometimes you say, COVID is a great example, right? People are like, what is the new work from home policy? What does it actually look like? Some people will say, a fixed mindset approach will say, how does Google do it? Right? And a growth mindset will say, what type of organization are we? What are we thriving to be? How does that align with our organizational values? And you think about the framework of solving the future work from home or scenarios of remote work within your organizational context. So the best practice approach and the how do we solve the problem for what is right for us is, I think, a good example in organizational context when you think about fixed mindset and growth mindset.
Yeah, I think you can definitely unpackage a lot of that thought process, looking at a so-called market leader and appropriating what they've done versus really building it from the ground up. Dialing back a bit, you mentioned around, from the recruitment standpoint, identifying elements of growth mindset. And I think this is something that, it takes a certain type of caliber and thought process to look at how someone has, showcased, that in his or her work. But what do you look for when you're scanning a CV, especially with Southeast Asia having such a huge talent war? How do you think about identifying those gems with growth mindset?
Oof. Can I tell you honestly, CV is one of the worst things to try to help you identify that. It helps you identify who's really good at writing CV. It doesn't really tell you what they're like. And So instead of saying necessarily going from the CV, I think from a CV perspective, is how do you as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, as HR, to not necessarily set up what I believe is, don't recruit from a job description. Don't tell people what I'm looking for you to do. You think about a job impact assessment. You bring forward to say, this is the impact that I would like this person to make. These are the problems I would like this person to solve, which means that in your recruitment process, when you're having interviews and conversation, the conversation should be moving away from, tell me the one time that you have done this, to, this is a real problem. Walk me through how you would solve it, right? Walk me through your thought process. And it may not be the right answer, but I think, again, cultivating growth mindset is actually believing there is no right answer. There is actually no one solution to the problem we're trying to solve. There are multiple solutions, but the solution comes with different impact and consequences. And that's what we need to work through as organizations. So I think, how do we frame our question? How do we frame the way that we think about hiring for talent is going to impact how we then build this growth mindset in the organization. Right? If you bring in the leaders with a growth mindset, then they are going to be able to build a team that sort of focus and foster that kind of growth mindset.
How have you seen that translate into an organization? So you talk about bringing in people, with growth mindset or showcasing qualities of that, but how does that actually translate into the next iteration of an organization?
So I think this goes back to the role of the leader. So how I've seen translating that is, again, I do think leaders set the tone for the organizational culture. So there's one, I've seen how organizations really provide the psychological safety for the teams to experiment. Experiment is one of the number one way to foster growth mindset. Right. So an organization that actually builds that boundary and safety net for experiment, I think that's a key. How do leaders are coaches that, again, instead of tell me the solution, tell me how you would tell me the solution, you say, walk me through your thought process. This is one of my favorite questions with my team is always, okay, you've thought about it, here is your answer, but walk me through that thought process, right? Could we think about, help me understand how you're thinking. Could there be different ways? Have we thought about different angles? And again, it goes back to, I've seen it in practice where the leader isn't sitting there and say, I know the best answer. I'm the smartest person in the room. I think my role isn't to be the smartest person in the room. My role is, how do I actually get a bunch of really smart people in their room to think about problems in a way that they never thought about before, by tapping into each other's strength, by listening, by asking questions that sort of drive the outcome together.
You mentioned a few scenarios in terms of reframing the questions, positioning, so it's more of a problem for them to walk through. In your experience, either at Riot or Gojek, how have you tried to foster this development?
So I'm one of those really annoying leaders that I'll ask this question almost every single time, right? So, but I will be very honest, it's not for everyone. There are definitely teams who's like, oh my God, I hate when she asks that question. And then I talk about the tendencies, right? You'll have team members that will have tendency. There's a bit more, what is the answer? What is the best practice? How do we come to that perfect solution? And then you have team members that really grow and thrive on that, because the beauty of it is that you help them to think about things that they may have never thought about before, or allow them to then to learn or think about what are some of the other things I need to learn before I can come with a broader solution or a thought that I never thought about before, right? So how do they walk away with that? Oh, okay, I have it in me to think about it in a different way, rather than this is the answer. I do think building a culture of growth mindset does require that consistency. It does require the role modeling. So as a leader, how do you role model that, right? How do you role model growth mindset? Also, as simple as, I can make a mistake. There will be times I've made a mistake, and part of growth mindset, I think, is actually own up to that mistake and say, ooh, I didn't do that one very well. But this is what I've learned. So I have learned this, and therefore, so I do think role modeling, and from a very practical sense, is how do you always frame your conversation through the lens of learning.
So if I'm an organization and I am ready to be gearing my team towards this next stage of growth, and I do want to start sort of fostering a growth mindset in my people, what are three key things that I can be doing?
So as a leader, I think as an individual, I think number one is avoid the temptation to go straight into answers. Big questions, small questions, sometimes these feels very like small problems you're solving. How to avoid the temptation to go straight into the answer? I think that will be one, right? Always entertain the opportunities that there are multiple solutions to that has different impact. And I will encourage to always ask again the team. My favorite question is walk me through your thought process, right? And allowing the team to share that thought process. And the most important thing as leaders, that it may not be aligned to the way you think, and that is okay, right? Your team, the beauty of having a team is for you to learn from different perspectives. So how do you, again, goes back to avoid the temptation of straight into the answers. How do we entertain and be open to the ideas that there are multiple solutions? And then third, how do we ask team to walk you through a thought process and really be open to be persuaded otherwise? I've come out from meetings where I'm completely in awe of the solutions and the thought process my team has been able to present, where, maybe my original idea just wasn't that great to start with, and that is okay. And then from a very practical one, I always encourage all the leaders to practice and role modeling that. So always sort of think about what is the one thing, what are you learning right now, right? If your team sits there and asks you in the morning, Susan, what are you learning right now? You should have an answer, an authentic answer that's true. It could be anything. It could be learning how to make great eggs, to, learning how do I, play piano. It doesn't really matter. But I think it's important to foster that learning mindset. And then always people talk about gratitude journal. I talk about learning journal. Write down your learning. What did I learn today? Small or big? What are the new things that you are experiencing, and that allows you to think differently?
Susan, final question. So we talked a lot about the business stuff, but personally, how do you think about developing growth mindset? Is it making better scrambled eggs? Is it learning a new language? What have you done this week to really push your boundaries and develop that skill set?
So I think for me personally, you mean what does growth mindset mean, or my learning, or what am I learning this week?
What are you learning this week to really push the growth mindset?
So, well, I am I say a new mother, but not that new because my baby is 13 months. So I feel I'm constantly learning, how do I actually apply this open and growth mindset to my child? How do I apply the conversation? You know how even as leaders or as parents, it's so easy to get into the mode of don't do that. Or I see him walking towards something, I go, danger, 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 I need to stop him. So one thing I'm learning is, how do I take a step back and foster that safe environment for him to fall and experiment? And I think that very much applies to teams as well. How do I kind of know maybe the team will stumble, but how do I build that safety, psychological safety for them to experiment, to maybe realizing that's not the best first way forward, but to learn from that. So I'm applying that growth mindset to parenting. How do I allow my child to fall without cracking his head open and be okay with that? And surprisingly, it's not as easy as I thought it would be.
Well, there you go. Growth mindset, no age limit. Susan, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be sending a summary of our learnings tonight over email. If you have any more questions or interested in connecting with Dr. Susan Chen or myself, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or at hello@newcampus.co. Have a great night and see you soon. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye for now.